now. Good morning. Buenos días. Bon dia. Good morning. I am Teresa Velázquez. I am the director of the Master MIN UAB. The first, thank you, IEMed, once again for offering us this opportunity. And thank you all for joining us in this session about communication and social change and intercultural mediation. In order to have three different points of view about this topic, we have invited three specialists, three women specialists, from different Mediterranean countries. A ver si lo digo bien. Shiden, a la vez el apellido, Bozdak, from Turkey, Elena Nassif from Lebanon, and Laia Vila from Barcelona, from here, from Spain, Catalonia. I now present her day. Shiden Bozdak is a researcher in the field of communication and media study. She studied political science and international relations at Bogazici University, and she's completed her doctoral thesis at the University of Bremen. In her thesis, she's analyzed the website of Moroccan and Turkish diaspora and their role in any community building. This is correct, no? After her thesis, she's continuing researching and teaching in intercultural communication, migration studies, transnationalism, globalization, and sociology of media and technology. Nowadays, she works as the Department of New Media at Cadiz University. And today, she will talk to us about the role of social media in social content in Turkey. Now, Elena Nassif, she changed her topic and her title in the, it's a little different of the program. But I think you know, I know, c'est français. We can enjoy this change, I hope. The first I present her will share with us some questions about the change consuming the past in contemporary Beirut. The case of Raudan Cafe during Ramadan. Nice, consuming the past in the contemporary Beirut. Bien, she is a multidisciplinary researcher, and the main objective of her work is to analyze the impact of the arts and culture in society and contribute to its vital role in community building and social change. Since 2017, Elena is the executive director of Culture Resource on an organization that secures funds for cultural initiatives and support a small project by young artists in the Arab world. Important thing, this question. Finally, Laia Vila, she is journalist and also ex-MIM, Master MIM, ex-MIM, and she is delegate of the Maghreb region in the International Institute Novak. She is a specialist in the Arab world, promotion and defense of human rights, gender, and governance. Today, she will be sharing with us her expert opinion on the participation of civil society in the prevention of violent extremism, the case of Tunisia. This is her contribution. Sorry for my English, but I hope you can understand me all. If not, bueno, we can... It's okay? Bien. Now, je pense the important is listen her, they, and the first, she, them, s'il vous plaît. Si puedes, por favor.
Just open my presentation.
Bueno, les amor, ¿no? ¿Sí o no?
Perfect. Thank you for this nice introduction, Teresa. And it's very nice to be here. This is such an interesting seminar, so interdisciplinary, so I'm very honored to be invited to speak here. I hope you will find what I present relevant, also for other contexts. I'm going to talk about Turkey. My main interests are really intercultural communication, communication between different groups, and role of new media, especially social media, within all these processes. So I will be talking about the recent research that I conducted in the last years. My main question here was, we have all been using social media for a while. What is then the role of social media for connecting us, basically, to people of different opinions? So does social media play a role for mediating between different groups, making them understand each other better, maybe also for deconstructing stereotypes? This was the main starting point that I had in mind. And in order to be able to answer this question, I did a qualitative study, which is not always very typical for social media research, but I think it's very important to have in-depth approaches to understand the backgrounds, to understand why people do certain things, what people think, and why do they think the way they think, you know. But before I start to present the research methods and the results, maybe to say a couple of things about the theoretical background. This question is not a new question. It has been researched since the beginning of the internet. People have been interested in this question, how does the internet contribute to social contact between different groups? And the question of social contact is an even older question in social psychology, especially. You see different disciplines have been dealing with this question. One of the main fields that deal with social contact is psychology, social psychology. There is this hypothesis that different groups in the society, if they come into contact with each other, if they have some kind of relationship, they will have less prejudices against each other. There is the famous thesis by Pettigrew, who is a social psychologist, and this idea has been tested over the years. There has to be certain conditions for this to happen. So not any kind of meeting between different people will lead to the construction of stereotypes, but if certain conditions are met, you can see better results. I'm not going to go into the details now. Maybe in the discussion we can think about that. But also political science deals with this question. They look at cross-cutting, what they call cross-cutting exposure, so being exposed to opinions of other people outside of your own group. Or cultural studies, communication studies have been dealing with interethnic, intercultural contact. Intercultural communication is very much about these kind of relationships, how difference is being articulated through encounters between different cultural groups, and how this changes people, for example. One last keyword here that I would like to use is network heterogeneity. This is more in communication studies and political science, and it's very much studied through a quantitative lens. So this field of research is looking at how heterogeneous the network structures of people are and how they kind of communicate within this heterogeneity. So this is a relevant term for me. I will come back to this. I am also looking at how heterogeneous people's friendship networks are, people's Twitter networks are, and what this means for them in the end. one other thing that I would like to mention in terms of the context of Turkey, because this research is done in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, but Istanbul is kind of like a microcosmos for Turkey with 15 million people, and you can find people of all backgrounds, like working class background, Kurdish people, Alevi people, immigrants, you know, like it's a small sample of Turkey. That's why I chose to do the study in Istanbul. I also live in Istanbul. Turkey is a highly polarized country. You might know about this. It has always been a bit polarized, especially along the ethnic lines and the sectarian lines. So the majority of the population in Turkey today is of Muslim origin, but there are different orientations. I think there are around 13, 14 million Alevis, and the rest are Sunnis, but there is a quite strong division between these groups. They have a social distance towards each other, and there is the Kurdish conflict, you might all know. It is an armed conflict today, but it's a conflict of over 100 years. So there is also this fault line. And there was always the fault line between the more secular people and the conservatives, religious conservatives. Today, this fault line transformed into a polarization between party lines. So it is more a division between AKP supporters and AKP opposers. This is a very strong fault line today. And one thing that we should also say, this distance is also reflected in social life. If you look at the recent surveys, people say, for example, if they don't like Kurds, they also say, I don't want to be neighbors with them, I don't want my kids to marry with them, etc. So what I am looking at is how this all reflects in social media, these kind of fault lines. Are they reflected there, or are there any ways of breaking these fault lines through the internet? That's an important question. So the research questions are, how do Turkish internet users deal with political differences in social media? And how does increasing polarization and censorship influence social media of Turkish internet users? I didn't mention censorship yet. Maybe I should say 2 words about that too. You might again know that there is increasing censorship in Turkey, and there is an authoritarian tendency. This also is true for social media and the internet. Many people are being charged of their tweets for doing propaganda, terror propaganda, or for insulting the president, for example. There are a lot of court cases because of people's social media posts, so there is a lot of pressure on social media as well. People feel surveilled in a sense, so it's not very easy, and this is something that you will also see in the examples that I show you in a minute. What were the methods that I used? As I said in the beginning, I mainly adopted qualitative research methods, and my approach was here theoretical sampling, meaning that I was looking for different people. Every time that I looked for a new person, I tried to find someone who would tell me something new, who had a different background. I also tried to have as many diverse people as possible in terms of age, gender, education level, religious and ethnic backgrounds, because it was very important for my research question. And I did semi-structured interviews, so I had a guideline, but I had open questions, trying to make people talk as much as possible about their experiences. One last thing that I had was ego-centered network diagrams. We used this in another research in Bremen, which was about migration and media, which proved to be quite fruitful as a material to talk in the interviews. It doesn't tell you much. I will show you an example, but you could talk about these networks in the interview. So you ask the people to draw a network, to draw their own network in the way that they imagine it, putting themselves in the center. You will see the example. It's a very simple thing, but it's a good exercise. That was also something that I used. Coming to the research findings, first of all, I would like to say a couple of general things about network heterogeneity, because I was interested in this. First of all, how heterogeneous are the networks? Here, you could clearly see the people who had more moderate political positions, who were not extreme in their party affiliations, who were not extreme in their political identifications. They had more network diversity, so they were connected with more people. I think education level, I didn't write it here, but education level was also an indicator, because the more you study, the more you come into contact with other people, you have more opportunities. And that was another thing. But it's not always something that determines the network heterogeneity, I also have to say. I will, in a minute, show a quote from a taxi driver that I talked to. He had a very diverse network of people because he was in touch with so many people in his everyday life. So it's not always directly correlated with education level, but generally education level is an indicator for network heterogeneity. And the party lines here was not the thing that determined the heterogeneity. So there were AKP supporters and CHP supporters who had quite heterogeneous networks, and there were people from both parties who had less heterogeneous networks. So it's pretty independent from party lines. It was more about the person's own patterns. And what you could also see was a correlation between the heterogeneity of online and offline networks. So if a person is in touch with various people in her everyday life, then the social networks, you would probably expect that, but still it was interesting to see that there is a correlation. But the online networks were more heterogeneous. When I asked people if they are in touch with people in different backgrounds in their everyday lives, they said they are basically more in close contact with people, like-minded people, but in online networks, most of them had also people from different backgrounds. So online networks are still a bit more heterogeneous. So this is an example of a network diagram that you can see. So this is what I asked them to do. This is the Facebook network. So I asked them to do it for Facebook and for Twitter. These are the main platforms that people use in Turkey. That's why I also focused on them and a bit on WhatsApp. I will talk about that too. So I asked them to differentiate their networks into groups, and I didn't tell them anything. Most of them had a couple of categories like this. So you can see I also have the English words for that. So this was someone who is what is the name? Doctor for pets, I'm sorry. Veterinarian, yes, the same word in Turkish. He's a veterinarian, works in a state institute, so he's in touch with a lot of different people. And in his Facebook page, he also has, for example, people like pet owners and colleagues who are also veterinarians. And of course, you would typically expect relatives, university friends. I guess these are the categories that we would also have. But he also had categories like people whom I know but I am not close to. This is a 25-year-old male interviewee, by the way. People who I would not greet on the street, and colleagues. So you see, this is a much more heterogeneous network than what you have in your everyday life. You add people like this. I don't know if it's the same in Spain, but in Turkey, people are pretty generous about whom to add on their contacts. I think this is very different in Germany, for example. They are very strict about adding people who they know. In Turkey, average is like 600-700 friends on Facebook, so it's pretty large. You meet someone, you just add them on Facebook. These are different norms, I guess. This is also important. What is interesting here is, so from these categories, not all of them are as heterogeneous. For example, good friends are mostly like-minded people. Of course, if you are more like a left critical person, okay, see. You will also choose your good friends from these group of people. Your colleagues might be heterogeneous because you don't get to choose them, depending on where you work. And the people who you know, who you are not close to, or pet owners, for example, these are the groups which you can call the weak ties. You might know this term. So these are the people who bridge you to different communities, different opinions. This is very important. So this is why social media can play such a role. But when it comes to the question, so this is about the network heterogeneity, it looks pretty optimistic. But when I ask them how do they deal with this heterogeneity, what do they do when they see someone who thinks differently than them, I saw that there were different strategies. One was observing. So to some people said, I read everything what others write, I learn from them, it's interesting. So this is probably the most the category that has most potential, because they care about others' opinions. The second was ignoring. So they ignored what the others thought, so they were not interested in them. They didn't even read them, or maybe they put them on silence. They didn't follow them. There was a more extreme strategy of deleting and blocking. I will show you an example in a minute. Another strategy is debating, really actively debating with other people on your own wall or on others' walls, like really trying to convince the others or try to enter into a debate. Last one is self-censorship, so choosing not to write because you fear to be controlled by others or to face sanctions. So one example for blocking from the interviews, this is a male draftsman. He's not a university graduate, but he learned it through working. So he said, basically, to summarize, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I asked him, what do you do when you see different opinions? He's like, especially if they're AKP supporters, I don't even read. I just delete them or block them from my list. So this is pretty much really cutting contact. There is no social contact here, you can see. The second example is about debating. So in democratic theory, especially liberal democracy, you would think debating is very important in the public sphere. That's how you come to a consensus. You have to have some kind of rational debate. You would think right away maybe this is a positive thing, but when you read carefully here, he says, I will read the last part only, my aim is to tell certain people about the truth. When I tell them the truth, I feel relieved. I have people from all backgrounds, from everywhere, especially from the Taxi Drivers Association. So this is the taxi driver that I was talking about. He's debating a lot, but his aim is not to really have a rational debate, but to convince others about what he thinks the truth is. So this is also already a very strong position entering into debate. But still there is a social contact. You can say this is also still more positive than just ignoring the others. The last example I have is about self-censorship. I'm coming to the end. My last slide is coming. So she says, she's a journalist, and she was quite active also in politics. She says, I commented more before. I would always add something in the beginning or in the end of the links that I share. But now she's more scared. She says, this is auto mechanism. I don't want to go to jail, at least not for this. So if it was something more important, I could even think about that. But I don't want to go to jail for a social media post. So this is how much people fear of expressing their opinion. Coming to my conclusion of my previous question in the beginning, I can say social media has the potential for providing social contact spaces. So you get into touch with more diverse people. This is true for many people, especially these weak ties are very important. But these contact spaces do not necessarily or automatically change people's opinions. You don't change your opinion because you read someone else's post. Still, this contact is important. If you don't have this contact, you are not going to have any opportunity to understand the other side. Many people also had a narrative of change in their social media use. Many said they had, for example, moments, very peak moments of polarization, like elections, the polls, the recent referendum, for example, where they had fights with their close friends or with the weak ties. So it's not always as tense, but there are tense moments where you tend to have more fights on social media and you delete the people. So your network gets more and more homogeneous, which is dangerous, I think. And many people also reported, especially critical people, not the AKP supporters maybe, that they fear and they self-censor themselves when they are posting online. Or they prefer to have anonymous accounts. That's also a trend. Like on Twitter, many people change their names to anonymous names. Last point, I couldn't talk much about that. There is a move from social media towards closed WhatsApp groups, Instagram, instant messaging groups, which are more homogeneous for discussing politics. So you wouldn't write your political opinion on your Facebook wall, but you would prefer to share your opinion on a closed and safe WhatsApp group. So this was also a trend. This is the Turkish context. I would be very interested to hear if this could connect in any way with, for example, recent debates and recent tensions that are happening here in Spain or in other parts of the world. I hope this can open up a bit of a discussion in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shidan, for this interesting presentation, for the conclusion also, and for the different theories you use in the bus for do this study, and for the censorship. I see a woman, journalist woman, very prudent. Yeah. The only about the auto-censor and the censorship, only a woman journalist. You say that's prudent, the woman. Then now we listen to Elena Nassif and her presentation, Consuming the Past, no? In the contemporary Beirut, the case of Café Raudan during Ramadan.
Super.
Vale. When you win.
Where is it?
Yes. Allí, ¿no?
Okay, super.
Yeah. Abajo. Ah, sí, fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. Hello. Yo soy muy feliz for being here. Yo, yeah. Discúlpame, yo no hablo español o catalán. Okay. So, consuming the past in contemporary Beirut, the case of Rauda Cafe. While Shidem was speaking, I was impressed how much there is a kind of relationship between what we are doing. Because she spoke about the fault line between the conservatives and the seculars, and this will appear again in my work, but it's not in the virtual sphere, not online, but offline in a cafe setting by the sea. I want to thank the organizers for putting such a great effort to bringing us all together and for taking the choice to support interdisciplinarity, because it's really, I think it's very, very important. The work I will be sharing with you today started during my PhD in 2010 and continued during my postdoc fellowships until I submitted this as a chapter end of last year, and it will be published in November 2018 in a book called Culture, Time and Publics in the Arab World, edited by Tariq Sabri and Joe Khalil. It's an edited volume. The research I'm presenting is on a cafe by the Mediterranean Sea in Beirut, so the Mediterranean Sea connects us. It's based on media ethnography, or immersion in the daily media and social practices of people, which I conducted in this cafe during the month of Ramadan. But I also keep going there, not just during that time, until I always keep going there since I was a kid. Rauda Cafe constitutes a valuable case study because it's one of those rare cafes that allow us to trace the continuities between the pre-war and the post-war cafe culture in Beirut. So these two things, not only the continuity with the past Beirut and with the time that was diverse, inclusive, and hopeful, that seems to be lost, or this is how people think about it, and it also represents a contestation and a transformation towards a socially conservative and economically consumerist society. So the socially conservative is coming with a consumerist society. What are these changes and contestations, and what do they tell us about cafe, leisure, and Beirut? To explore these questions, I divide the presentation into two sections. In the first, I explain a little bit about Beirut's cafe culture and categorization in order to be able to situate Café Rawda within it, so you know why Café Rawda. And then I explore the shifts at the level of the second part, at what happened in Café Rawda. I will tell you a few things, that Café Rawda used to serve alcohol and they stopped serving alcohol. So this is one shift. And Café Rawda did not have a screen, and then they introduced a large screen to show television during Ramadan and during soccer. So these changes, how did they change the sociality in the space? In the conclusion, I try to link between the cafe space and the idealization of the past, and where the past fits in our contemporary everyday life. So a little bit about Beirut cafe landscape. Beirut cafe landscape underwent many changes during the war. It's possibly possible to make two distinction between two eras, the pre-war and the post-war cafe landscape. These changes are observable at the levels of cafe practices, geographical location, and spatial classification. The research that's available, I will not go now tell you about history. Cafe culture started in the 16th century, and it came from Yemen, and then it came to Italy. But I will just share with you some of the, it's all there if anyone is interested in the histories of cafe, and maybe we can do a comparison between Barcelona and Beirut. So the research that's available understands pre-war cafe culture, or classifies it, mainly looks at what's called the maqha sha'bi, which is like more, if you want, this is a bad translation, traditional cafes. It's not the good translation. It's more like popular or mass I don't know, cafes. So these cafes are based on three characteristics. If you've been, for example, to Damascus or Cairo, you would see them. People can play cards in the cafe. They smoke argile. What is it called here? Shisha. It's the Egyptian name that won over the Lebanese name. and hosting male-only clients. So that used to be the past. But in the past, this is the seaside cafes were an exception because they hosted families with children, so women, it wasn't a male-only sphere. And the classifications of cafes, there are multiple approaches. It can be according to location, the identity of the clientele, the leisure activities available, and the cafe relationship to its surrounding. But the Lebanese anthropologist Douaihe classifies this maqha sha'bi, or what we're calling now traditional, into 4 types, which are based on location. That's pre-war. These are in Beirut city center, two types of cafes in the Beirut city center, a third type in the residential neighborhoods, which had a different function, and then the ones which are by the seaside. Another researchers add the port cafes. Maybe also in Barcelona there are port cafes, which are different from the family seaside cafes. So we're talking about this as how was the landscape pre-war. During the pre-war as well, in the 50s and 60s, the French style, more café trottoir style, came to the Hamra area of Beirut and Ras Beirut. This is like a lot of history maybe to introduce at this moment. But what's important to differentiate between this pre-war era and that destroyed the city center and the post-war era, after the war, like the male-only Sha'bi cafes in a way ended. So these male-only spaces are very rare to find. In very few neighborhood cafes, they are still there. But at the same time, what we call the characteristics, which is playing card games and smoking shisha, continued in different ways. And so this is what I'm suggesting, another kind of classification, which is called the neo-traditional cafe. or the concept of neo-tradition, to classify the contemporary mixed-gender cafes that serve shisha and allow card games, rather than in contrast to the modern. The neo-traditional here, following Talal Asad, has the present always at its center. So it's not like it's not a modern cafe, it's a very modern cafe. We're calling neo-tradition because it's taking elements from local cultural elements from the past, which exist within the context of mass communication and digital connectedness through the internet, the mobile phone screens, and connectivity. Before I now introduce Café Rauda, I also want to say something about the consumption of alcohol in these spaces. In Beirut, alcohol was allowed to be served in seaside cafes from 1925. And the decision to permit alcohol, similarly to its prohibition, reflected social changes and negotiations. Kritcher explains how alcohol consumption in Britain was sometimes perceived as being a problem and how processes of moral regulation were shaped by public debate. While moral reformers in Britain tried to influence the state as the final regulator, in the case of Lebanon, new trends to restricting alcohol use in cafe spaces do not seek state legislation, and they are mainly associated with the rise of pious entertainment within the Islamic sphere, what Harb and Deeb talk about. Deeb and Harb, they identify cafes that are located in the suburbs of Beirut, and they call them leisure's moral spaces. They are spaces where it's moral to be there because there's no alcohol consumption, in contrast to other spaces where it's pubs where you have alcohol. They classify these alcohol-free cafes and restaurants into various styles, excluding the formal dining style. All of these cafe styles they introduce can be grouped under what I identify as the neo-traditional spaces. Alcohol availability then provides an additional layer of comparison and classification. An alcohol license defines the cafe space in terms of its location and the identity of its clientele, and less in terms of interior design. So you can have the same style of cafe with shisha and card games, one with alcohol, one without alcohol. So the style doesn't change much. It's the people who go there that change. And this style of cafes, they are different from the ones that do not serve shisha and allow card games. So where does Rauda Cafe, the one I'm going to be talking more about now, where does it fit in this landscape of... This cafe, which is called Rauda, which means garden in Arabic, sometimes we call it Shatila, which is the name of the family that owns it. It's one of these rare garden cafes by the Mediterranean Sea in the Ras Beirut area, which is part of the Lebanese capital, which is in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. It was opened by the grandfather, Ahmed Shatila, in 1935. And after his death, his wife managed it until she died in 1996. Then the children took over the management in turns. It is by the shore. It's an open-air space with parallel walkway entrances separating middle seating plants and trees, and there are places for children to play, and they serve food. And multiple factors differentiate this place from other cafes in the city. It is first a garden-like space by the sea in a city with few public gardens and privatized coastline. It provides a calm atmosphere away from the busy streets, accessible to both men and women from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds, so it brings people together. Rauda's unpretentious ambiance is open to coexisting extended families, lovers, friends, political activists, artists, and intellectuals across gender, age, class, region, sect, and political identifications. It's a weird place. Everyone feels accepted in a way, so everyone goes there. Its main distinction lies in the symbolic capital that Beirut's intellectuals historically brought to Rauda. And because it attracted intellectuals, it also had this symbolic capital. In 2008, then the new management, one of the children of the Shatila, took over the management, and they stopped serving beer. And it was like this, like a wake-up call for the secular part, that the conservative part has won. So what happened then is the regular clients wanted to understand what's happening. They understood that the change in management, and they obviously were not happy, and they initiated a boycott campaign on social media in the hope of pressuring the owners to reserve the decision. The beer ban was also coupled with other changes, which is the Ramadan, which is because they removed alcohol, so they brought this Ramadan. Do you know what Ramadan is? Yeah. So they brought the Ramadan drama series with the screen. And so this is Rauda again. And this is what, it's okay. This is one of the main, one of the regular clients, a music composer, singer, Ahmad Ka'bour says, "Why do we come to Rauda? Because this place gives us the impression of a lost stability, especially as it is in front of the sea. It's still standing by the shore. It's still and the sea, the sound of the sea is still witnessing us. That is why we come to Rauda. Especially for me, the Beiruti, the person from Beirut. I have been coming here for more than 45 years. Yes, it has undergone change. A wall repainted, a tree was cut or grew taller. The clothes covering the tables changed, but the place remains for what it symbolizes: stability, quietness, repose, and steadiness in a time of rapid change. Rauda also looks like the country, with all the diversity it holds. Knowing that the decision to ban alcohol has disappointed me, I would have liked its Beiruti Muslim owners and patrons not to be bothered with beer, because Christians, seculars, and tourists have the right to drink alcohol. The place has not changed, except during violation of what Rauda except during Ramadan and the World Cup and the screen that is turned on all the time. I feel it's a violation of what Rauda represents to me, a chance to meet, engage in dialogue, and reflect, and not to be present in a consumerist society that drains my attention and increases my anxiety by what is shown on the screen." So Ka'bour's description of Rauda stresses these two shifts: the prohibition of alcohol and the introduction of television screens. When I asked the owner why they have done that, he explained that the decision was both religious and commercial. By commercial, he emphasized his desire to reach out to a new clientele in a city with a growing number of people who are uncomfortable with frequenting a place that serves alcohol. So because people became conservative, they wanted this cafe. That's what he said. He claimed that former clients were not allowing the cafe to break even. Irrespective of whether the decision was driven by religious or commercial reasons or both, the boycott calls by Rauda regular clients following the beer prohibition failed to jeopardize the profitability of the cafe. And then these same clients came back to Rauda. So in a way, the alcohol ban contributed to a slow shift in the clientele, but did not threaten the symbolic meaning of Rauda as a place that connects contemporary Beirut to a past with a more horizontal culture. The introduction of the television screen, however, redefined Rauda. It changed it from being a Sha'bi cafe that represents stability in into a neo-traditional space that represents consumption. So it's the screen that, more than alcohol, that really shifted the kind of the feeling of the cafe from being a cafe that is not into fast-speed consumption with advertisement and television images running all the time. But at the same time, this change that happened with Ramadan, what we can, or the Ramadan mood, which can be called the Christmasization of Ramadan, also did not also succeed to change the cafe all the time. So similarly to the alcohol ban, the presence of the television screens in Rauda slightly changed but did not alter the place. Rauda remained inclusive of people from different sectarian, class, and ideological backgrounds. So it's not only the spatial, which is socially constructed, but also the social, which is spatially constituted within spatial forms and relative social relations. In a way, this gives, allows us to see the power of space and place and the need to preserve these places as a form of preserving these socialities. Rawda's history as a Sha'bi seaside cafe hindered its shift to an enclosure for the conservative clients that were identified by Mohammed Shatila as the ones he was targeting, the owner, I mean. The continued presence or return of some of the non-conservative crowd, although they were annoyed by the alcohol ban, guaranteed that Rawda remained a meeting point whose meaning is neither fixed nor static, but open to contestation. This contestation over place reflects a contestation over values that can also be traced in the debate among Rawda's clients attending the drama series. So in a way, it opens these discussions amongst people. Although the alcohol ban introduced a demarcation between the conservative and non-conservative Rawda clients, identifying the conservative public was not straightforward. So this fault line between these conservative and non-conservative is not just like grouping two people who are like two different that are. So this conservatism can also be found in the non-conservative crowd, and I will explain how. Conservative in this, so the young conservatives I interviewed exemplified how the category is open to constant negotiations. Conservative in their case did not correspond to one clear set of values or practices, either religious or social. The question of who is the conservative was not only a matter of positioning the individual vis-à-vis the category, but also a matter of tracing shifts in time, shifts that had implications for the ways that the young perceived themselves and were perceived by their peers. It's unfortunate that I'm not able to share with you a lot what the young people were saying that I interviewed during that time. Gender mixing in this case was not a sufficient indicator of a progressive attitude towards gender. The neo-traditional, in their case, was not only about blending entertainment styles from the past with those from the present, but also a choice of idealizing the past and its values, a past that was used to legitimately criticize the present and to champion conservative moral values. So at the level, for example, of gender mixing, that was not for them progressive. Gender mixing was taken for granted. But at the level of the past, of how they wanted, why they were coming to Rawda, they were idealizing a certain image of the past that they wanted to consume. 3 more sentences. So in this context, there is another conservative trend, one that is not linked to religious or moral conservatism, but that additionally gives value to the past. In the case of Rawda, Ka'bour, the guy we read his, for example, similarly to other clients who re-frequented the cafe after the ban, requested the conversation that the place be conserved, that the conservation of the place as a place from the past, harboring stability and security in the face of a fast-changing Beirut. Thank you.
Elena, bien, after the communication of our contemporary life by social network, we work for the face-to-face communication, interpersonal communication, diversity communication, about the past, the remembrance, and also the present, no? In your presentation. Now, Laia, if you want beginning for explain us the participation and civil society in the prevention of violent extremism, the case of Tunisia. When you win.
So thank Teresa, and thank you also to the IEMed for the invitation. First of all, I would like to start my speeching saying that it's a pleasure to share this space with you. The first reason is because it's a table full of women experts that never ever happened in my life. So maybe one day we will overcome and we will treat as equal as men in the academic spaces. Second, because I was a MIM student in 2017, so it rained a lot, and to meet students that are actually doing the MIM master, it's always a pleasure. And also because I met Teresa in 2013, 2003, yes, when I started my degree, no, 2002, when I started my degree in journalism. So sharing a table with Teresa, with a person that I have shared a lot of spaces, especially academic spaces with her, it's also a big pleasure. So first, I would like to start also my speeching saying that I'm not super strong in English. I'm more fluent in French, and I just came back from Tunisia yesterday at 12 o'clock in the night. So French is still occupying all my mind, so please, if I do any mistake, I hope that you may forgive me. I will also say that I'm not an expert of the MENA region. I'm somebody that somehow managed to work in North Africa region for 8 years now without speaking Arabic, which is quite amazing, but well, always studying, but you know, it's not that easy. So, okay, let's start with Tunisia. Tunisia is presented along the world as a pattern, as the model of a peaceful transition and rule of law reinforcement in the Arab world. No, it's called also the fair of the region. No? So everybody speaks and pays a lot of attention of what's going on in Tunisia, and we all pray that Tunisia revolution will overcome also. So data that shows or that proves this vision is that Tunisia is the country where European Union invests more per capita than in all the world, even in countries affected by natural disasters or migration crisis and so on. So European Union is the country where it puts more money per habitant. So that's an important data. So yeah, there is a common agreement in the fact that we all want that Tunisia will overcome its transition. But all this revolution and post-revolution, and now we are talking about local elections that inshallah they will be held in the 6th of May this year, it's also covered by some shadows. First, there's an increasing number of extremist violent groups and terrorist attacks. In this sense, since 2015, we have to remember that there's been the attack of Bardo, the witch one of Sousse, the witch one of the Avenue Bourguiba. There was also an incursion of Daesh in Ben Guerdan, that it's a town close to the Libyan border. So according to non-official sources, and that's super important because I'm going to go back to this, the first country in the world exporting foreign fighters will be Tunisia. So 6,000 Tunisians will fight apparently with Daesh. 12,000 Tunisians will have been arrested or interdicted to quit the territory while they were trying to join Daesh in Libya, Syria, Iraq, etc. And around 1,000 Tunisians will be in jail accused of terrorism. So I really want to put the focus on the fact that these are non-official sources. Why? Because the state refused to publish this data. Not only that, 2 days ago I was with somebody of the Dutch embassy in Tunisia, and I was speaking with him because normally on February they should have published a big research regarding PBE and terrorism in Tunisia. And I couldn't find this research, and I was wondering, where is the research? So he told me that the research, which was actually funded by its country, has been blocked because the president of the state doesn't like the data that are mentioned there. So they just fired all the research team and replaced by another one and changed the data that they don't like, and then they are going to publish, for sure, a non-scientific research. So, and that happens in a context where when you have a meeting with the National Commission Against Terrorism, la Commission Nationale de Lutte contre le Terrorisme, they told you that they are full of research. There are so much research about this topic that there's no need to do more research, that we can They have rooms full of research regarding terrorism and PV in Tunisia, which the reality is that I can't find this data at all. And when you ask them, please share me all this research, well, they say, yeah, you can find them. Well, so for all the people that want to work in research, please, if you are told that no, that has been investigated at all, you have to go forward, even whatever you are told. So the second thing that, the second big shadow that, let's say, that changes somehow the image that we have of Tunisia is regarding the anti-terrorist policies. So anti-terrorist policies, most of them adopted, or the which one that I'm going to talk about adopted since 2015, so after the revolution, they are provocating violations of human rights. I can find the adjective, so I go to the point. So these violations, they are at different levels. First of all, the fact that the terrorist or the anti-terrorist law is not concrete at all, and it gives a general definition of what's terrorism, allows that human rights defenders can be put in jail because of the terrorist law. So they call terrorism each action that could cause damage in public spaces, private spaces, vital resources, infrastructures, communication, transport, informatic systems, or service public. So that's a super wide definition, and a lot of things can be considered as terrorism. For instance, if we go to the street, we do a demonstration, and we broke a glass of a store because we don't like this store, that will be considered as a terrorist attack. Second, the fact of regarding preventive jail, preventive detention. So before, when you were, before going to the jail, that's the commissary. Yeah, when we go to the police station and you are retained there, you could be until 6 days. Now, if you are charged or your charges are related to terrorism, that can go until 15 days. So you are 15 days without being almost communicated with nobody, and not only that, but you have to know that until you don't pass to the judge, that's after these 15 days, the lawyers don't contact you. So you are really for 15 days alone. Yeah, that's, the European Union is trying to support Tunisia in order to provide lawyers while you are in the police station, but that's a right that nowadays doesn't exist. People that goes to a police space, they don't have access to a lawyer, even if they claim for it. Third, the capital punishment. They foreseen the capital punishment for people being charged of terrorism attacks. Yes, they don't implement it, but it's something that goes against the transitional and the rule of law model that they wanted to build from 2011, and that was modified in 2015. Then there is also excessive use of the urgency state. So since 15 January of 2011 to March of 2014, that was urgency state without non-stop. Then in 4th July of 2015, when the Bardo attacks took place, since then until today, it has been almost without interruption. Some days of interruption, but not that much. So there is, let's say that Tunisia, since the revolution, lives always in an urgency state. This urgency state allows to use excessive force and unjustified force by the police. That means going to your house without a judicial permission, to do raids in the neighborhoods considered high risk, arbitrary detention, torture, restrictions of movement of people. Not only they are forbidden to quit the country, but also they are forbidden to move from a town to another inside Tunisia. So that's more or less the scenario that Tunisia is living nowadays regarding anti-policies, anti-terrorist laws. That's denounced by lots of international NGOs working in human rights, like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. Also, Novak, we produced a study regarding this thing of the anti-terrorist law in Tunisia. So I would like to read super quick item one. 2 days after, that's somebody called Mohammed Rezgid that has been persecuted by the police since 2014. They didn't detain him, but they were always there disturbing him. So 2 days after, the 27th July 2016, the police came down my neighborhood and they asked people where I lived. I go out my house and I told them to come in, but they said, we don't want. The afternoon, they came back with a riot and they broke the door, and they knocked the door, and when I opened the door, I found 60 men, 60 policemen, 60 and not 16, with arms, cars and motorbikes. They were part of the judicial police, and they get inside my house. They didn't have a mandate. My mother lost the conscience, only seeing these 60 men going inside their house. And they didn't find anything, but they broke everything. So these two things, let's say, the increasing number of terrorist attacks, which is true, and the fact that the anti-terrorist policies, they're not effective because the number of attacks are growing up, but they're, let's say, in the origin of extremism violence because they are causing human rights violations, provoked that civil society organization in Tunisia started to think what we have to do with this issue, how we have to position ourselves in this debate. So they decided, so first, we have to be engaged in this issue. We have to criticize anti-terrorist policies and human rights violations committed through these politics, but at the same time, we have to propose an effective answer to this phenomena, which exists and which is growing up. So they decided to adopt a preventive approach based in human rights values, participative approach, gender equity, and peace building, which are values that, in fact, they are part of civil society organization. So in this debate, the plan of action of United Nations was like a kind of window of opportunity because it started or it promoted a new paradigm to face this phenomena, which is violent extremism, but through different values which are no more security, authoritarianism, and so on. So in this context, we decided to organize a conference in Barcelona in 2017, January 2017, more than a year, where 172 organizations of 22 countries of the north and south of Mediterranean, we adopted a plan of action of Euro-Mediterranean civil society organizations, which contained 9 objectives, sectorial objectives, and one, let's say, operative objective, which is the creation of the Observatory for the Prevention of Violent Extremism, the OPEP. This observatory has the mandate to monitor the implementation of the 9 objectives decided in this action plan. So, as Novak and with the partners that we work, we decided that we couldn't work in 22 countries, that we wanted to work only in 3 because we are a little NGO, and we decided that we wanted to work in Barcelona, in Amman, in Tunisia. I'm going to try to explain what we do, what we exactly do in Tunisia. So, we we started to implement this observatory for the prevention of violent extremism in Tunisia, which is the main organizations that are working in this observatory are two that they were awarded with the Nobel Prize in 2015, which is the Tunisian League of Human Rights and the UGTT, the trade union, a feminist NGO that created before the revolution, and Free Sight Association, that is a legal NGO specialized in PBE youth women. So we decided that we wanted to work together, first to understand between us, and then to open the space to civil society organizations working in PBE. Why? Because there is a rain of money, literally, in Tunisia to work in PBE. So lots of initiatives are being, they start here and then, but there is no coordination between these initiatives. So that can provoke the contrary effect that we are searching for. So this observatory, we want to be the space where all the initiatives, it doesn't mind the ideology that they want to, well, if we are working in PBE, if they want in counterterrorism, that we don't want to know. But we want to be the space where all the initiatives promoted by civil society organizations in PBE can be shared and discussed. Then, second thing, we are trying to reinforce the role of women and youth and civil society organizations, local civil society organizations, and local governments, which are also discriminated by the big debates regarding security, because when a state uses to be a dictatorship, normally it's also centralized. So local authorities, they are not used to participate in the discussion of big policies. So we are trying to support all these actors in the co-production of public policies to prevent violent extremism. At a local level, first of all, to understand what's going on at a local level, especially in the regions which are close to the border of Algeria and close to the border in Libya, not only because Libya, the situation, and Algeria, the situation, but also because they have been marginalized by the central power for decades. So we want to reinforce the role of these people in the co-production of local politics in order to have a global diagnosis of what's going on, of what are the priorities of these sector groups in PBE, and then, with all that, go forward and propose a plan of action of civil society organizations in Tunisia regarding PBE. So then, when all this process, that is a 2 years process, will be done, we also want to support youth in the production of alternative speeches to violent extremism. Why? Because youth, they are amazing in Tunisia. I don't know if you've never been there, but they are super well capacitated, trained. And there is a medium class, but they are completely excluded from the public debates, and they are not taken serious as agents of change. They are only seen as potential terrorists, let's say, no? Or they are poor, or they are in the chômage, but never as a positive actor. But we think that they can be a positive actor, and we need to reinforce the role on this. So how are we going to do this thing of the alternative narratives? Through breakdance, slam poetry, comics, films, etc. So the idea is to train these people in the production of these alternatives, and then to use these formats adapted to their point of view to sensibilize and to reach more youth in the country. And then the last thing that I'm going to say, that is we are also going to work in jail. Why we are going to work in jail? Because the jail in Tunisia is the space where you can be radicalized more easily, meaning that people are not, so a lot of people are put together. It doesn't matter whatever you have done in your life and why are you in jail, you are all together in the same room. Not only that, but while you are waiting for the process, the judicial process to start, you are put in jail. So there's people that maybe they have 10 years because they kill I don't know who, and a youth that has been arrested because he was smoking a joint all put in the same space. So that it's really, really critical because the kings of the jail are jihadists and so on. So that's super dangerous because it's a space where it's easy because you are all together in the same room in really bad conditions. So it's normal that if you feel that it's injustice and there is somebody training you, so maybe you can become seduced by its ideology. So thank you so much for your patience, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you, Laia. In your presentation, we come to the real situation also. Like that Tunisia used the fight anti-terrorism for the cleaning, the political opposition, the organization of civil society, and the citizen, no? A little, no? This one. And all that with the money of the European Union, less or more. No? Yeah. So the first thing you say. But now we give them the word to Ricardo Carniel and after Lucía Nieto for...
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, all the three speakers. It was very interesting, excellent presentations. I try to be very briefly because I think we need to leave time to the questions of the audience, and certainly they have more questions and more interesting point of views as well. But I would like to highlight one general aspect of the table, of this panel, that is considering the different expertise and backgrounds, but most of you are working in different contexts, but with this academic or background and the knowledge produced. And we believe that this panel is a kind of an example to the need to reinforce this collaboration between academia and NGOs and civil society, because sometimes it seems that the research produced by academic field is stayed only in universities, and the civil society or NGOs institutions go by their side. So this collaboration and contribution, I believe, is one important issue to strengthen in the way that the academia should produce more research, applied research, and give more and facilitate the knowledge to the civil society, and NGOs and institutions should take a look more times and with more emphasis to the knowledge produced by academic to contribute in the real action in the field. So I would like to highlight this aspect in this table. And considering the three presentations, the first one from Dr. Bosdag, it was very interesting because we talk a lot about social media, social networks, but what kind of social interaction we really observe, right, in this digital sphere and this new digital public space. And for me, it was very interesting, the methodology of the design, the own network diagram. For sure, in the future, I will take of you this methodology to apply, because it was very interesting to see how the people draw their own diagram or their own network of relations in this digital space. So very interesting. And I will leave some very brief questions to each one of you to, in the end, if you want to answer. Yesterday afternoon, we had in a panel a journalist that talked about the danger of social networks in countries such as Egypt, that in the beginning, in the so-called Arab Spring, Facebook or other social networks was a kind of supportive to the civil demonstrations. But now it seems that the social networks are used by the governments to persecute and to discover who is behind some demonstrations. So I would like to know if in Turkey this is happening as well, that in the first moment maybe this could be a platform to different voices, but if there is a danger as well in Turkey, that the people, you mentioned self-censorship, they are hiding because they have the fear, because the government are using this potential to find people that are against the political power. So in the second second presentation by Dr. Nassif, it was very interesting that how the people mention about the diversity in the environment of the cafe. So for me, that I never been in Lebanon, I would like to know how this diversity is represented in the real daily life of the cafe. So I was wondering, the people, different people go to the places and are mixed, they are interacting mixed, or there is the table of the women, there's a table of the black, there's a table of the Muslim. I don't know if how kind of diversity you can observe in this area. And if we have time in the end, considering this last minute change of topic, if you could give us 50 cents of considering the work you are developing in the cultural research in our institution about this topic that we think is very interesting about the cultural mobility of artists in Mediterranean field and how this contribute to the integration of the area as well. And finally, Ms. Laia Villa, to this presentation of the Tunisian case, it was very interesting as well because, as Teresa mentioned, we settled the feet on the earth, and it's very sad and concerned that we saw Tunisia because it was a kind of symbol of the so-called Arab Spring and how the things are going in this country. But from your experience in this project of the prevention of violent extremisms, do you feel that the civil society, they have this opening to, or they feel that they could contribute to change things there, or the work start to explain them that they could do that? So this is my comments and questions for the speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much as well. It was really interesting. I especially found very interesting how we saw the social interaction on the online sphere and then the social interaction on the offline sphere as well, and then the need to improve the alternatives narratives in order to change as well and to, for better social change. So I was wondering, what do you think is the correlation, as you said in your presentation, between the online and the offline, in the sense that it's perhaps the online space in which there's more heterogeneity, therefore a better debate, and in which case is that debate switching from the bars or the offline places to the online, or are the bars still very important for, the diversity you spoke on all the debate? And also, how can we change the narratives as well? So is the online space a good space to change those narratives, or do we still need the offline space in order to do workshops like you're doing, or to do different activities? Thank you.
You can answer, and after, leaders, if you want ask something, don't. We have a little time, no? Okay.
So regarding the collaboration or the necessary collaboration between university and NGOs in research, I do agree in the fact, in the project that we are launching nowadays in Tunisia and PBE with all these NGOs that I mentioned before. We count with the university, the Tunisian university, to do a research. The problem that we face is not only the collaboration between university and NGOs. It's the fact that the Tunisian government and the European Union tells you, but why you keep doing research? We know what's going on. In fact, what I was told the last time that I evoked the point of the research was, if you are planning to do another project that will do another research that will say that it's all fault of the Troika, we know that, thank you so much, but we are not going to fund you anymore. So it's like they don't like research. That's the thing. They want you to start working blinded and not knowing exactly what you're doing in a super sensitive issue such as preventing violent extremism, in which the facts and the actors and so on, it's different from region to region, from town to town. So for me, the dangerous thing is not us. We can work together as university and NGOs. For me, the dangerous thing is that the international funders, they don't believe, they think that the research doesn't serve to anything, and the local governments, they don't like research. So that's really not good at all. Then, regarding the thing of if Tunisian civil society organizations, they still believe that that can change things? Yes, absolutely. Not only that, I would say that if Tunisia is not going behind faster than it's already doing, is because of the existence of a strong civil society organizations. For instance, the NGOs that we work with, they organize press conference, they public manifestos and so on, especially while the terrorist law was being debated in 2015 until 2017. So yes, it exists, I will say, a perception that we have to work on this. The thing that we want to do as OPEP is to create this space, because there are a lot of criticism, but not coordinated nowadays. They are coordinated in other issues, but not in this specific issue. So our idea or our aim is, okay, the FTDS that they have, I don't know which center of whatever, the Avocats Sans Frontières, let's work all together. Let's give us a positive agenda, which is shared. And at the same time, let's denounce together the violations that are committed, not each one from its space, because if not, we will not succeed. So that's regarding the second question. And regarding the third question, the alternative narratives, outline, offline, I think that you have to use both. Meaning, social networks can allow you to reach a huge number of people. That's true. But the reality is that life not only happens through social networks. So social change, let's say that the social networks that she can explain better, but they can sensibilize you or so on, but then they don't allow you, or I don't think that they allow you to take action. So for me, what can provoke the change is the combination of them. For instance, I was this last weekend in a Maison de Jeunesse, which is a public space dedicated to youth in Bizerte, which was full of young people. I've never been in a public space, a public equipment, so crowd of people. From children of 2 years old till youth of 25, 26, and so on. So, and they do all different activities. So if you allow people to have, youth especially, to have their own spaces where they can be trained and do whatever they want to do in this life, and you mix that with the work in social networks, I think that that is the thing that could make success. So, but not only outline, not only offline.
Should I continue? Okay, thank you. Thank you for these interesting comments and questions. First, Ricardo mentioned how social media can be dangerous in terms of state control. I think this is exactly what is happening. During Gezi Park protests, right after Arab Spring, there was so much hope and optimism about social media, how it can be used to organize protests and do critical activism. But it turned the other way around, and now it's an instrument for surveillance at the same time. Like the state itself can follow you and take you to court for tweets or for Facebook posts. Not only the state, for example, I know so many cases where, let's say, someone doesn't like you or your ideas, then they take a screenshot of something that you wrote, maybe then delete it afterwards, but they can still charge you because of this tweet. This also happens a lot, like personal rivalries are translated into these kind of legal actions. And people are very afraid in this sense. This is not the only thing. There is a pretty good article, a recent article, I can share it with those of you who are interested, by Bilge Yeşil and her colleagues. They are saying that there are a couple of strategies. One is this, charging people of either insulting the president or terror propaganda because of their social media posts. And a second strategy is trolls, really systematically I think they are not officially employed by the AKP, but there are a couple of troll groups who work systematically against critical people on social media. They disturb them, they mob them, and they also try to manipulate public opinion. There are also some good works on this. And last strategy is to block websites or delete tweets through an institution which controls the internet content. So there are a couple of strategies to control the social media environment, because there is so much censorship already on mass media, but social media was a relatively free arena for a long time in Turkey. Now it's also starting to become a dangerous area. So people employ different strategies. Some of them try to use VPN, try to have anonymous accounts, so they still continue to write, but it becomes more and more difficult. And about the relationship between online and offline, I can say there is a continuity. I try to also emphasize this in my presentation, but in connection with what Elena was telling us, I think this is also important. Cafes are still very important places, or any other everyday life encounter, like driving with a taxi and talking to the taxi driver, chatting with someone on the street. You know, these kind of encounters are still important. And in some senses, online environments might offer a better space for debates, because you don't have these status differences that apparently, and you can discuss freely, etc., etc. But the social sanctions are also not there, so it's also easier to escalate the debates. You know, there are so many fights on social media. Maybe face-to-face you wouldn't do that. You would be more careful before you swear to someone, but online you can just start insulting the other side, so this is a disadvantage. I think they go hand in hand, though, like the online discussions and offline discussions, because our offline environment also has an influence on how we perceive the online debates. Last point is about the need to work with the NGOs. I completely agree with you both. It's, from my perspective at least, as an academic, it's not enough to just say, okay, this is what is happening, everything is going in a bad direction. I would also love to work with people in the field and try to find ways to fight hate speech, for example, or online conflicts. I think this is definitely a point that would be interesting for me too in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I will start with the question of social sciences, or like academia and the real world, because I really think that social sciences does not only give us, allow us to understand reality, but also, and not only how to be critical of this reality, but also to imagine an alternative reality. And sometimes when we're stuck in our everyday kind of work, we need these forums, and I really think like that if you have like an evaluation report that you need to write, we really need these spaces for us to talk, because you don't know how ideas come, like, and things get connected. It cannot be planned. It has to happen organically when people meet and talk and etc. and find ways of exchanging and linking our understanding of the world with our imagining of a different reality. And here the Mediterranean is the alternative reality for the world. I hope one day we will succeed. Concerning the spaces, like and the heterogeneous, because you used a very important thing, the heterogeneous or diversity versus uniformity or homogeneity. I found myself in this struggle between, if you want, the fascism and the progressive, or the religious traditionalism and the conservatives and the seculars. Like these, there's a very strong divide in Europe and in the Middle East, in the world. We tend to go to our people, like to our like-minded, and to be closed in our circles. So I found myself going to the same places, seeing the same people, and then, okay, where are the other people? Like, and then your view of reality will be just also linked to your people, and then you don't want to see what others write on Facebook, and you block them or hide them or like unfollow them, and they exist, but you don't see them. And this cafe was an alternative space because it allowed these people to exist even in the same space without necessarily talking. So you know, because you know how these people, like, they're composed, like the Bourdieu and, you know. So you have the extended families of more like conservative families all together eating, and then you have the lovers, one man, one woman, or two progressive women meeting. Obviously, you can see from their attire, and then you have the more like veiled conservative family, not necessarily families, also friends, and you have the age also, because also we tend to go to places with the same age group all the time. And then the family spaces are different from this is like a more youth space that allows, you can also see older people that you miss seeing sometimes in our everyday life. So this combinations of different kinds of people from, and people know each other as well, like, and also seeing intellectuals that you know that this is a theater maker, etc., but you see them in the same space. It gives you the sense that you're not excluded. You're not in a homogeneous space of only your own tribe, kind of. Regarding, maybe, I have two other points, but maybe we open and then I can answer them later.
Now, if you want to put something, question to the table for the colleague, and if you want, the fair together, no? To all the questions after they can answer. There are some questions. Una, another. Bueno, una. This is the moment. Okay.
Yes, my question is to Laia. I would like to know, when you put civil society actors together in the prevention of violent extremism, do you find that they have a similar approach in this type of prevention, or do you find a clash among the ones working in prevention of violent extremism? Thank you.
Hello, my name is IEMed, and my question is for all. I wanted to know, how do you see, as part of academia and civil society, how do you see the legal cooperation and people who represent the people, like members of the parliament, how do they push for legal and regulation or laws that prevents hate speech and violent narrative in terms of cooperation with civil society to combat this issue? So do you see that this is happening? Because I have heard, I know that this exists here in Europe, but I'm not sure in Tunisia or in Lebanon, for example. Thanks.
I start again. Regarding the different approaches in PBE among civil society organizations in Tunisia, if there are clashes or not. Yes, meaning, well, clashes. There's the same division, as it was mentioned before, between secular people and conservative people, and they can be together because they don't like to be together. I don't know. And we, as NOVAC, we are not... As an international NGO, we can't impose the fact that they work together. Our role is little. We can make some suggestions and so on, but reality is that they are starting creating its own spaces, but shared between all of them, but without, through their rhythm, respecting their rhythm, etc., without not pressure and so on. And yes, the approaches are different. For instance, as the NGOs trying to launch this observatory, we want to work with youth and women, etc. Our approach is more, let's say, human rights based, equity. We work also for the equity of gender, and peace building. But there are other NGOs, because we think that the problem is that, that the violations of human rights are provoking, in fact, that the violent extremist groups are gaining spaces. But there are people know that they think that the problem is inside their religion, so they are in Tunisian NGOs that are working with imams. And that's a different approach, we respect it, but it's not our approach. And there are NGOs that they think that the problem is the beside, the people that are not in the center. So what we have to do is to work in social cohesion, etc. And people, NGOs that think that the problem is that there is no job, so no espoir, that I can know the esperance. Oh. So no hope, yes, I found the word. No hope for youth, and that causes the radicalization. So they want to work in creating new jobs. So different approaches. I think that there is no one that it's better than the other, that all them are, they are complementary, and that we should try to work together. Regarding the regulation in hate speech, it doesn't exist a regulation in hate speech in Tunisia. Well, if you say something really bad in the Facebook, they can come to your house, but no, it doesn't exist a regulation. But which exists inside the Ministry of Civil Society Organizations and Human Rights. They created a platform of counter-narratives. We talk about alternative narratives, they talk about counter-narratives, meaning that if suddenly in the social media appears a video saying you have to go to the jihad, go to Libya or whatever, they send automatically a video that apparently they should change their mind of these people that shared or see the first video. We don't think that this approach it's working at all. What we have to work is in prevention. If somebody is already seeing this kind of videos, it's not because the government, Tunisian government, will do a different video that they will be convinced. So that's our point of view. And I don't, regarding hate speech, what I see in Europe is that they use it to put activists, lefty activists in jail. So I don't know if I still believe in hate speech laws. I use it. Seriously, I use it, but nowadays, seeing what's going on, especially here, I'm not sure that the laws to prevent hate speech are used in the correct way. In fact, I think that they are used to persecute the people that were trying that this law was adopted. Thank you.
Yes, I will not. I'm not really aware of these things, so I will not try to answer your question. I will just say something about cultural mobility of artists in the Med region or across between Europe and the Middle East. We're having, like, it's becoming more and more difficult. I think you know that, like, even because there are legal agreements, or there are agreements in order to facilitate the movement of cultural actors and artists, etc. But still, the person, the human from the region, is regarded as a security threat, and the security discourse is still very strong, and it might be threatening more and more this movement of these people in order to allow to come and represent their lives and their experiences, and to allow for this exchange and for this different views of this reality. So I think also one thing that it's important for us to keep aware of is that how to keep containing or keep challenging this security discourse, because or else it might be very difficult for example, for someone like me to come and share their research or their experiences in like 5 years. So this is a challenge for us for our future.